Da, 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 boing. Um, what did I do last night? Last night I went and saw Mr. Bungle playing in New Zealand for the first time in the band's history. So if you don't know Mr. Bungle are a band that's, I guess, most famous. The reason they became famous is because Mike Patton from Faith No More, formerly of Faith, well, is he still in Faith No More? Kind of in Faith No More, was a singer in Mr. Bungle. And so when he found fame with Faith No More in the late 80s, he kind of shopped his demo around for his original band, Mr. Bungle, which he made with his high school friends, Trey Spruance and Trevor Dunn. A few other guys, those are the only two that are still in from the original lineup. And they actually got a major label deal with Warner Brothers. Pretty sure it was Warner Brothers, and and they released three major label albums that were very varied and quite experimental and just very different. And they broke up. Well, I mean, they never really broke up. They made their last album in 1999, which is California, and then they, I guess, had a hiatus, however you want to term it. They didn't perform or produce any new music for 20 some years. And then it was kind of during the early pandemic, from memory. I might be wrong on the dates a little bit, but from my memory, it was like in that first year of the pandemic, like 2020, there was an announcement that they were releasing music. And I was kind of like blown away because all the stuff I'd heard before that is that, and bands always say this, of course, oh, we're never getting back together, bridges have been burned, this and that. And Mike Patton had worked with Trevor Dunn a lot, continuously, since, he had done Funtamus and Tomahawk and other projects together. And so I was obviously it wasn't those two. It seemed to be there was the relationship with Trey, the guitarist, and Mike. And I don't know exactly what. There's actually an interview I was just starting to watch earlier this morning that maybe would address that, but I didn't get all the way through. But I was going to watch it later. Anyway, they reformed, but they didn't really make any new music. They re-recorded the material from their first demo, which is called The Raging Wrath of the Easter Bunny, which was basically purely thrash death metal with a little bit of weirdness thrown in as well. But it's pretty much just, I'd call it more thrash than death. I've heard it described as death metal. To me, it sounds much more thrashy than death. Um, doesn't seem technical enough to be death metal, but they re-recorded that from there. It was originally written, I think, in like 85, 86, when they were still like just leaving high school, something like, teenagers. And they re-recorded it with Dave Lombardo from Slayer on the drums. So if you're going to make a thrash metal album, you can't go past the greatest thrash, one of the greatest, in my opinion, one of the greatest drummers ever, but let alone thrash metal drummers on drums, and Scott Ian from Anthrax on guitar, together with Trevor on bass from the original lineup, Trey Spruance on guitar from the original lineup, and Mike Patton. And they re-recorded that demo and released it. And I'd say for some people who liked Mr. Bungle, and I kind of put myself in this category. Like, I loved Mr. Bungle. If I went through a real heavy Mike Patton phase in the late 90s, early 2000s, where it's kind of like I consumed everything that he was involved in. And I really loved Mr. Bungle, particularly the second album, Disco Volante, this one here, and the third album, California, which I have owned twice before, but I don't currently have a copy of. When they came back with the stuff in 2020, it was just, like I said, it was just the very early thrash metal stuff they did. And so a little bit disappointed because I was always more interested in their experimental, avant-garde, however you want to class, that music that they did, and this wasn't that at all. However, it's Mr. Bungle, and you know, it's just cool to see them back together, to see at least those three guys back together, because very much musical heroes of mine, all three of those guys. And so they have been touring for the last, two years off and on. They've been touring around Europe, the US, and I think Europe. And they've just before they came here to New Zealand, they were in Japan, did their first shows in Japan ever, and they're going to Australia today. I think they're going to play some shows in Australia. So if you're Australian, and so what do I think about the show? They played at the Auckland Town Hall, which is a venue that I like, but doesn't breathe very well, so it gets very hot inside. They played with the Melvins. And the Melvins is another band I like, but is a band with it's an intimidating discography, back catalogue, where they've just got so much stuff, it's hard to know where to start. And so I've listened to things from them, I've listened to albums of theirs, and over the years, like I think the first time I heard them while I was like 13 or 14 years old, a lot of people knew them as friends of Kurt Cobain and kind of involved with that. And so I think that's how they got their first record deal, like kind of that Houdini era. Was it Bullhead or Houdini were their first big label release? I can't, but in the early 90s grunge era, they were kind of connected to Nirvana and that kind of Seattle, Washington scene, even though they weren't part of that really. They had a very different sound, but they were also kind of cited as musical, responsible in part for part of the kind of the birth of grunge. They kind of, certainly of that kind of sludge sound. I know grunge and sludge are not necessarily connected directly, but a lot of bands do cite them as a influence, and certainly Nirvana cites them as an influence. But they continued, where a lot of those bands broke up or stopped or people died. They've continued and they're still going. They've released albums consistently through the last 30 some years, with Buzz Osborne being the singer guitarist and Dale Crover being the drummer. Those two are kind of the only two consistent members. They've kind of switched out bass players and other touring musicians. At the moment, the bass player is Stephen McDonald used to be in Red Cross. Remember them, those guys from the 90s? Well, he's in the Melvins now. I didn't actually know that. Because, it's hard to keep up with all these bands from the 90s, what they're going on and doing. And Dale Crover, because when I saw them come on stage last night, I noticed, that's not Dale Crover on the drums. It was a much younger guy. It was the guy from Murder City Devils, and I researched him after I got home to see he was in Murder City Devils, and also a bunch of other bands as well, who kind of some of I'd heard of and some I haven't. And he was a fucking amazing drummer, the guy. Cody something. Probably should have said his name. That's a bit disrespectful, isn't it? Cody something. But they were like, I was actually quite impressed with them. Quite hypnotic, their sound. In some ways, I kind of enjoyed their set more than I enjoyed Mr. Bungle's set. Not that I didn't like Mr. Bungle's, it's just like I was really pleasantly surprised how much I enjoyed it and how much it kind of gave me got a kind of few goosebump moments when they were playing. And for music that when they're playing a set list of stuff that's comprised of albums I think they formed in 1983 or something. So they've got music going back for over 40 years, over 40 years. And when they're comprising a set list of stuff, I've no way I could be familiar with all of that stuff, because I've only dipped in and out of their stuff. But even the music I didn't know was kind of it gave me goosebumps, their sound. So really enjoy the Melvins, kind of a surprise there. Because often when I bought the ticket to see Mr. Bungle, And so even though I saw the Melvins were playing and I was kind of interested to see the Melvins, it wasn't, if the Melvins had cancelled or something, I wouldn't have been worried. But usually with opening bands, it's kind of like just like, let's get through this. But yeah, I really enjoyed the Melvins. Then, there was about a half an hour break and then Mr. Bungle came on. And they played pretty much exclusively thrash through the whole set, broken up with a few other little bits and pieces. Now, what else they played? Hang on, let me think. They played True, a cover of True, the Spandau Ballet song. That one. They played that and then kind of went into another kind of thrash song from that. They also, in the encore, they came back and did Totally Devoted to You, the Olivia Newton-John from the Grease soundtrack. Totally Devoted to You, that song, which was quite funny and quite cool. They kind of, if you know Mr. Bungle, they're kind of famous for doing covers of those kinds of songs, like that. Songs you wouldn't expect. What other songs like through the history? Like they did a good version of "Nothing Compares to You" by Sinead O'Connor. Not last night, but I'm talking about in the past. They do a Super Mario Brothers medley. Like they do the. That's why I showed him. They do the theme. And then they also did Welcome Back, Kotter. From the theme from the TV show and many others. I remember that in the early days of Napster, I used to spend my time going and searching for Mr. Bungle covers, downloading MP3s of Mr. Bungle covers, and some of them were mislabeled. Like there was one I remember, like a Zelda, the theme from the Zelda video game. It said it was Mr. Bungle, but actually it wasn't Mr. Bungle. It was another band. And anyway, so what else? They also did, in their encore, the last song they did was a cover of the Sepultura song Territory from Chaos AD. That was fucking awesome. That was amazing. Seeing that with Dave Lombardo and Scott Ian as well. But the rest of it was just basically. Oh, they also did. What did they did from this album, from their debut album? They did "My Ass Is on Fire," but that was basically it. Everything else was from the demo. It was hard to be honest. This is the thing with a set list full of thrash metal. It does, especially that demo, it does tend to blend together a bit. The newer one, like I think they did that newer song that was not on the original demo, the Erasist one. I might be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that was one of the newer songs. But anyway, that one kind of stands out because it sounds a bit not as thrashy. It's kind of hard recounting shows. I kind of sound like I'm babbling here. But overall, it was a great show. And I'm really happy because I was not going to go. It was literally a last minute thing. They announced they were coming here about 6 months ago. And I thought, well, I don't really want to go see them play that demo. It's not that thrash era Mr. Bungle is not that interesting to me. As much as I love Mike Patton and I would love to see, probably I'll never, the chance to see them would never, I just thought, nah. And then just the last week, I thought, well, maybe I will go. And then I was like, really, literally 50-50. And then last night, my wife worked yesterday, so I was just at home with my son most of the day. It was a Sunday. Just hanging out with my son. And then when my wife, I was kind of, should I go, shouldn't I go, should I go? And I was kind of looking at the price. The price was basically $100 New Zealand, which is like what, $55, $60 American. And my wife came home and I go, I'm thinking about going to a concert tonight. She's like, what? You never said anything about this? Like, she wasn't like angry or anything. She's just like, because she knows that I talk about music a lot and that if I was planning to go to a concert, I would have mentioned it to her. She was like, but you haven't even talked about this. Like, why are you going to spend $100 on a band you haven't even been speaking? I was like, well, I couldn't really explain to her. And this is what I said. I was like, well, I kind of don't want to go. Just the idea of I had to drive into the city, find a car park, walk down to the venue, stand in the venue. I wasn't going like none of my friends. As a 43-year-old man, you don't have mates to be going to like metal concerts with. The most of the guys I know, no, they're not. Maybe when we were teenagers, this would have been on the cards, but certainly not now. So I had to go by myself and like standing by myself and like it's hot. And in a concert, people just piss me off. I'm sure if you're my age as well, you'd feel a similar way. People smoking inside when you're not supposed to smoke inside. It's fucking like it's already hot and stuffy it is, and you're blowing your fucking weed smoke or your vape pen or your fucking whatever else. I just want to punch them in the back of the head when I see people doing that. And then there's, obviously 99% of the people are fine. They're just, considerate, but there's always like that 1% of fucking assholes. And it just puts me off going to live shows nowadays. But I did it. I went. And I'm glad I went because, like I said, I don't think they've never come before. I can't see them ever coming back again. All three of those guys, obviously Lombardo and Scott Ian are just kind of like, they're not in the actual band. They're kind of almost like guest musicians. Obviously, Scott Ian's going to be, Anthrax is his main thing, and he's busy with that. And he also does other things as well. I think he does like spoken word tours, and he's involved with a lot of things. Dave Lombardo plays for so many bands. You always see his name pop up for things. And I think he also just released a solo album. And then Mike Patton, he's famous for just going from project to project to project to project. Like he owes Faith No More a tour. They were actually due to be coming back to New Zealand, I think 2021. And then obviously the pandemic happened and they didn't come. And then also he had that whole mental illness thing. That's right. That's why the second time why Faith No More didn't play here is because he cancelled the show because he was suffering from agoraphobia after the COVID. Like he didn't want to go out and face people, which is relatable. And so he owes Faith No More a tour. Whether that ever happens again or not, I'm not sure. And then he's got all those other things that he does, and he's who knows what he's going to be doing next. He was doing Dead Cross, which is kind of more like a hardcore sounding stuff. Again, with Dave Lombardo on the drums. I'm kind of, again, it's a bit one note for me, Dead Cross. I like Mike Patton in his more experimental. That's why I like Mr.Bungle so much, because Mr.Bungle in the 90s there was everything. There was metal and jazz and rock and funk and everything in between, sometimes within the one song. And the same with Fantomas. Even though Fantomas was certainly an extreme metal band, it had bits and pieces of other things all over the place. You listen to like an album like The Director's Cut, and it approaches those songs from so many different genres together, and that's kind of what made it so amazing. But things like Dead Cross, it's just kind of, and the same with this most recent Mr.Bungle album, demo, EP re-record, it's a bit one note. And then Trevor Dunn, he does a lot of different stuff. He's like basically a jazz musician in his downtime. I think he's doing a tour with Buzz Osborne from the Melvins. Like not an actual Melvins tour, just Buzz Osborne and Trevor Dunn. And then Trey Spruance, I know he does a lot of different stuff as well. Secret Chiefs 3, but he pops up in lots of different like kind of jazzy type stuff. So my point is the chances of them finding time to get back together and maybe record new material or even just touring those original 3 albums, the self-titled Disco Volantae in California, seems, far-fetched, to be honest. So there's probably not many chances to ever see them again. This might be kind of like a one and done thing, as much as I'd love to see them do that other material. So that's kind of why I went. And I enjoyed it. I know if I hadn't have gone, I would have regretted it. I've seen Mike Patton. First time I saw Mike Patton project was in 2000, no, not 2000, 1997. When I was a teenager, he came with Faith No More on the Album of the Year tour. And even now, that was one of my favorite concerts ever. And part of that is because I was 16 years old. And you can't enjoy a concert the same way you do as a teenager when you're older. There's something about being young and jumping around like an idiot and just not giving a shit. And you can't do that when you're older. And so I loved that band so much, Faith No More, when I was a kid. And seeing them come here and play, it was like, yeah, it's one of my greatest concert memories ever. Then I saw them again. I saw them with Fantomas in 2001, Tomahawk in 2002. Saw the reunited Faith No More in 2010. I saw them with something else as well. Can't think what it was. I'm sure there was another thing I've seen them with. And then now with Mr.Bungle. So I'm a fan of his stuff. And so if he tours here, I'm generally going to go. And I know if I hadn't have gone, seen them with Lombardo on the drums, I would have regretted it. So I'm really glad I went. Now, this is meant to be a secondhand CD channel, isn't it? And so these are the two secondhand CDs. Well, actually, this one's secondhand. I got this about 25 years ago, secondhand, in a secondhand, when there used to be lots of music shops and lots of secondhand music shops. I got that. And I got that for $13 at the time. This would have been like the year 2000, I would guess. And even back then, it was quite hard to find this album. Like an idiot, I threw away the jewel cases and the artwork. I've talked about this before. I've made other videos about this. You can go back and find them. I kind of talk about regretting doing that. Can't do anything about it now, can I? What's done is done. I still own the disc. That first Mr.Bungle album, I like it, but it's certainly number 3 in the top 3 for me. It's much more ska and funk influenced, and I heard it described just yesterday as circus metal, and that is kind of a good description, because it is kind of wacky. You can't just say it's a ska album or it's a funk album, because it's not. It's got metal and jazz and all sorts of other shit in there, but it is, here they describe it as funk, metal, experimental rock, avant-garde metal, ska, jazz fusion. Yes. But as I said, someone described it as clown metal or circus metal, clown metal, circus metal. And it does have kind of imagery of clowns. The album cover's got a clown on it. They used to wear, or some of them at least, wore clown masks on the live shows. And I think in that video they did for the song for Travolta, or quote unquote as it was called on the album, some of them were dressed up as clowns. And it's kind of like this, the organ or the keyboard they use sounds like kind of circusy, that kind of circus organ sound. I don't even know how to describe it other than that. The song on that I really like on that original is Dead Goon, which is the last song, which is very kind of jazz sounding. And it's got this, or at least when I first heard it, it was when I was first learning bass guitar. And Trevor Dunn does this really crazy bass thing. Like, I can't even describe it. Kind of like it's descending, but doing it in a weird way. Kind of like spidering descending. Apparently that was written on piano originally. I remember I read an interview where he was describing how he played it, and he didn't actually write that bass line. It was written by whoever did the piano part, or whoever, that's why Mr.Bungle kind of doesn't sound anything like Faith No More, is because it wasn't exclusively a Mike Patton project. They've all got writing credits on all the songs. So yeah, it's kind of all over the place, that album, or the that stuff. The second album, Disco Volante, is quite a big change from the first album. It's kind of lost a lot of its funk stuff. It's much more, I don't know how, much more experimental and kind of like noise. So this one they describe as experimental rock, art rock, avant-garde metal, jazz fusion. So if you listen to it, and like for example, Everyone I Went to High School With Dead, which is the first song, that kind of just sounded like this like kind of Melvins type sludge doom kind of metal. But it almost sounds like a joke kind of song. And this is another thing with Mr. Bungle. Everything seems tongue in cheek. Everything seems to be kind of like ironic. And maybe that's like a 90s thing. But in the interview I was just listening with Trey Spruance before, he was talking about why they re-recorded the demo, the thrash metal, death metal stuff. And he said, we had all this material from the kind of from when we were kids in the 80s. And a lot of people just kind of thought it was like an ironic joke, that stuff. But we were like serious about it at the time, and we were kind of proud of that music. And we wanted to kind of re-record it and do it with, do it justice. And so, there he says that, at least that stuff, it wasn't a joke, but it's hard to really know. And the thing is with Mike Patton, anything Mike Patton is involved with, he spends so much time kind of taking the piss out of everyone and everything, especially in the 90s. It was always hard to know what was what with that guy. Like he did interviews where he would just lie about everything, not like lying like, you know what I mean, like lying to make fun of the interviewer. And so just make up all sorts of stuff. And so it was really hard to know what was what. And I think all those guys in Mr. Bungle had a similar kind of sense of humor as Mike Patton. But anyway, and then the other stuff. So like Violenza Domestica, which he speaks Italian in that. And then the song that really kind of blew me away when I first heard it was The Bends. And I don't really know how to describe The Bends. The Bends it's like 10 minutes long. And it's just kind of like, it goes through it's almost telling a story, but I don't even think there's any lyrics in it, any vocals. It just kind of goes through making sounds, but it sounds like it's telling a story through sounds. I remember, I can't remember, I would have been quite young when I first heard it, but it really opened my mind. I was thinking about this the other day, how when I started kind of listening to different kinds of music and how it just made me understand that music didn't have to be verse, chorus. I mean, anyway, that's going to go off topic here. But anyway, I love that song, The Bends. The other song on that I really like is they did Carry Stress in the Jaw, which again, Carry Stress in the Jaw has got a thrash metal kind of element to it, hardcore element. But then at the end of that, there's a secret song. It's called The Secret Song, and Trevor Dunn is singing the vocals. And apparently he was in the studio by himself and he found a recording that the band had made without him. Like, obviously when you're recording stuff, all the members aren't always in the studio, especially with a band that was quite big like Mr. Bungle. And so he secretly recorded vocals over the top of it without telling them, but he does it in a voice that sounds like Grandpa Simpson. It's quite funny. But again, it's kind of like almost like a joke song, like a comedy song. But it's also a good song at the same time. Like the music itself stands up. Merry Go Bye Bye, which is the last song on the album. I like that one as well. It's a great album from end to end, but it's different. So those are the two albums I own of theirs. I used to own California, which is their third album. And again, that's very different again. That's much more almost kind of, how would you describe it? Loungy, jazzy lounge. Again, very experimental. Kind of has completely eschewed or done away with the ska funk elements completely and the metal. I think from memory, I can't think of a single kind of metal part in that album. So here what they describe California, they describe it as noise, pop, western, doo-wop. There's a doo-wop song that's what the fuck's the name of that song? Oh, that's driving me crazy. I'll go down to the track list then. Vanity Fair, that's right. The Vanity Fair is like a doo-wop song. Air Conditioned Nightmare. I guess that's kind of got a little bit of metal in it. The Holy Filament, which is probably my favorite song on the album. I don't know. There's just so much I could say about Mr.Bungle because it's really hard to kind of encapsulate them because their sound is so wide and they change so much. Every album, it was kind of like completely like a different band almost. If you go from the demos they did in the 80s, so the Raging Wrath of Easter Bunny, thrash death metal, Bowl of Chili, or I think it's pronounced Bowl of Chili, like a joke, which is much more ska funk. Then did they do another? I think they had another kind of demo in there as well. Like, there's so much stuff I heard from them when I was like used to research them, and you don't know what was actually what, whether that was actually an official release or was just, oh, that's right, God Damn It, I Love America, and OU 818. I never really heard anything from that. So there's had that stuff, which is all very kind of lo-fi sound. And then they come in with this album, and what year was that? 91, I think, which is, like I said, kind of a lot of funk, ska, metal, experimental jazz. Then this one, which is much more on the kind of experimental avant-garde side with some metal, but kind of lost the funk and the ska. And then you get to California, which is again completely different. Like it says, like a bloody doo-wop, jazz, noise, pop. And so it's hard to kind of talk about them in one kind of thing. But I've spoken here for half an hour, so it's hard to talk, but I've managed to do it for half an hour because I've talked about a lot. I talked about the show as well. I'd say if you get the chance to see them, go see them. If you get the chance to listen to their albums, I would recommend their albums. If I had to recommend one album, I'd go with Disco Volante. If you like thrash metal, then I guess you can listen to Raging Wrath of the Easter Bunny because it has two thrash metal legends on there. Two of the big four, Scott Ian from Anthrax and Dave Lombardo from Slayer. So, yeah, I could go on, but I won't because I really doubt anyone's listened this long. So that's it. Mr.Bungle, 2 CDs without jewel cases, sat on a piece of kitchen tissue on my couch. Adios.